Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up.
So, hello everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up, where we look at everything to do with the London market, technology, change, innovation, culture. And this week we're going to major on the full interview with Professor John Seddon. A couple of weeks ago, we kind of previewed the main points of the interview, but this week we're going to play the whole thing, so you can get to hear that whole interview, and we'll give a couple of responses to that as well. But of course, we've got the news to kick things off. Ben, why don't we go with yours first? So this is Case lifts the lid on the Willis Aon Towers Watson malarkey merger.
Or no merger. So this is the big news of the week, big news of the year, really. And I think I called it a few weeks ago on the show that I thought it probably wouldn't go through on the DOJ thing, which is, so we've seen all the news about the collapse of the merger, the $1 billion payment, which I've heard is mostly just going to go in legal fees and costs anyway. It leaves the broking market in some level of turmoil. But this is Case. So Greg Case now, the question really is, will Case stay on? Of course, he's not going to go immediately because that would look like an obvious failure. But I think this is, whatever way you look at this is a failed mission on his part, and it doesn't leave probably the legacy he would have liked to have had, which was to be back at number one again, which they're not going to be anytime soon. So I think it's interesting to look at his comments here, which is, I suppose, a very prepared statement and but it's interesting because he said that in the end, it's all about not compromising his people and the client priorities to close the deal, and that in the end it was the US was not prepared to move it forward, although other jurisdictions were. And he's really putting this to say at the feet of saying client value, it's all about the customer value in the end, which is his mantra. I mean, it's interesting. I don't know whether I kind of believe all of this stuff. I mean, look, in the end, the deal was a great deal to be a dominant player, to part, of course, to be able to dominate the market in terms of pricing as well as probably value. I mean, it's got, both of those things come with dominance in the market, and the competition authorities in the US didn't like that. And we're not here to argue that now because that's a longer one. But does it feel real? Does it feel authentic? I don't know that it particularly does. I think to some extent, I think the argument about the staff is gone because it's been such a long time, and they've been hemorrhaging people, obviously, and it's been a terribly uncertain time. He might argue, well, that's about keeping people, but it's about getting the deal done and then making this fantastic new thing. But people haven't particularly been treated well. So Howden, chief exec, was on the other day, David Howden, talking about this, saying he's been treated his staff appallingly, and that they would never do that at Howden and things. And maybe he's being opportunistic, probably is a bit, because they're all going to get staff. But it's not a good look, although Aon's share price has gone up and they'll do pretty well, because I think some of the shareholders are relieved about that.
I think there are these mega mergers, as the headline says. There are big risks. There are always, to begin with, the narrative seems to go, look at the upside to this merger. It's going to be amazing. We're going to have all these synergies and everything else, and we're going to be able to put together a plan that will drive the business forward. But actually, when you get into the detail of trying to bring two massive organizations together, it's so difficult. And I know that this isn't the reason why this is collapsed, but I think the the press around the people aspect of this is going to be a big problem, I think, for the organisations going forward.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's. I mean, they could probably have got over that in the end, but the other issue I think here is this is a massive swipe by Case at the US, saying it's effectively not innovative and it's stifled competition, which is actually exactly the opposite of what the DOJ and Biden's administration is talking about. They're saying we want to encourage competition. So it's there's a certain sort of peevishness about all of this because you can read it here. It says we got approval from many jurisdictions globally, and the exception was the US. Well, to say the US is an exception is a kind of funny statement to make because it's about this. There's this thing about US exceptionalism, but when you're trying to get a global deal through, where the US is by far the largest part of that operation, to say the US was an exception on the regulatory front is a bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
The tiny old US getting in the way as if it was some little blocker. It won't endear, I don't think, the competition authorities to Aon after this, but I bet they're probably not the best of friends at the moment, regardless.
Yeah. I think we'll keep a watch on that. I think it will be interesting to see how this plays out, especially in the market in London. And Gallagher's is now talking still about doing the deal on the reinsurance with Willis. Willis looks a bit lost. Its share price is down. It's very messy, and I think it's messy for the market. But a lot of it, as you said earlier, would be about the talent shift, whether people just say, well, I'm fed up, I'm going to work somewhere that's a bit quieter than this. But Aon will go on. It's too big a business, too good a business to not. Will Case last? Will he stay? Will he stay or will he go?
I don't think he will, but in the end, I don't think he will.
Let's see. Right, let's move things on. So Bronick, let's turn to Bronick.
Yeah.
Opportunities ahead for Hiscox.
Well, another person who, on the face of it, has gone as a result of missteps during his tenure. I think we said last week, he has in lots of ways done a good job at Hiscox and moved the business on a lot. But I think it's ended, as often it does, with both politicians and the CEOs in slightly tinged with sadness and not quite so good as it could have been. And then this speech, a decade of opportunity ahead for Hiscox. Well, I will draw a big question mark around that. That is a statement that I don't think necessarily, in my view, stands up to scrutiny. I think the business now has got a lot of issues, and the new chief exec is going to have a big job on his hands. Yeah.
And if you just look at some of the press that's come out this week, what brokers are saying around the BI and the reputational damage that it's really had, and just the effort they're going to have to put in to claw that back over the next few years, I agree with you. I don't see it as an opportunity at all. I see it as a time to kind of go back to the values that got them to where they were and see if they can rescue.
I know. Brand. It's a bit sad, this, because it's a small statement. It doesn't really say anything. We look to capitalise on attractive market conditions and continue to invest in the retail expansion. Those are two of the most bland statements you could say about the market. These businesses are about the people, the reputations, the brand, and that's what they've lost, right? They've lost all that important stuff. And when you talk about opportunity, that's not going to get people out of the bed in the morning to go and work at Hiscox. Those two things there. Yeah. And I'm afraid there are businesses at the moment that are attracting the talent, more so than this. And I hate to say that, but I don't, I can't sort of sit here on things like, this and or anyway, really, and say that is a statement that you can get away with, particularly. It's a bit depressing, really.
It is a bit. Let's hope they get it right. Okay, let's move on to Insurtech. This will lead us nicely into the interview with John Seddon. So, worth $1 billion.
Yeah. So, just a quick It's just a quick article, but I wanted to draw this one up because there's such a lot of talk at the moment about how much money is coming into InsurTech, and it's getting quoted everywhere. And this particular article quotes some of the, not the InsurTech, i.e. I've got a, the smaller enabling tech businesses, the ones that sell software, but these are actual insurance businesses that are tech enabled, I guess you'd call them. Multi-billion-dollar valuations, so that you can see the numbers below. So the question really, though, is, and it's raised actually in some of the comments under this particular article, and it has been raised elsewhere about companies like Lemonade, is how much money are they making? Well, of course, most of these are not. They have appalling loss ratios, 150, 160% loss ratios. They're losing a shed load of money. And therefore, you've got shades of dot-com era, you've got shades of the most recent investments by people like SoftBank and WeWork and things like that, which were all big promises, but they never materialized. And so in part, what you probably also have is the movement of capital towards potentially attractive businesses. In other words, funds have to invest in digital businesses. And if they've got not many places to invest, and these are the ones, then they have to put some part of their portfolio into this, even if they think they're going to lose it. So it becomes, to some extent, there's an argument, I think, that says this could be just the madness of markets, that in the end, money will go to these businesses because you're just basically digital. Like if you used to put blockchain on a couple of years ago, your valuation would go up.
Yeah.
But no other reason than the fund systems, the algorithms would push some money that way. So this is about value, and it's about whether you have got real businesses. So does it matter? I think I was listening to the InsurTech London, Robin Mertens, talking about this, and he was quoting the Economist saying, "Well, it doesn't. If you get the money, you get the money, and that's it. Do what you can with it while you've got it," which I do think to an extent is true, but it also feels like not particularly healthy if a lot of these businesses are going to fall by the wayside, because in the end, rather like the dot-com boom, the tech will go in other places. So in other words, the investment isn't going in the right places in the tech. It's kind of being thrown at high-profile businesses. The money's going there, not into the right places.
Yeah, and I think you've said it before, but I think a lot of these insurtechs are good at raising the money, but then poor at actually delivering the value afterwards. So
the underwriting side. I mean, I've also said, to be fair, that there is a huge amount of potential brand value in organizations that grow out like Lemonade, and they might be able to do that. But there's a point at which, rather like with WeWork, the losses become just too much for the investors, and they'll pull out and they'll leave it, and that'll be the end of it. It's the natural cycle of things, but there's a lot of that going on at the moment. There's a lot of hype in the industry. We on here talk a lot about more of the fundamentals, and this is what we're going to hear from the video in a second, really, which is digital last.
Indeed. Lovely segue. Look at that. We're actually getting quite good at this. Right. Yes. So that does bring us on to our main interview. So a couple of weeks ago, we previewed Professor John Seddon talking about systems thinking and productivity, and kind of his six key criteria, I suppose, for increasing both. We're going to play the whole interview now, including that couple of minutes clip that we showed last week, and then we'll come back and just discuss some of the themes that are raised. So here's the interview. I would like to start by just giving you the opportunity to introduce yourself. We've known each other for a number of years now and take part in the events, but perhaps you could just introduce yourself and some of the background work you've been doing.
Oh, yeah. I'm John Seddon. I run the Vanguard organizations. We're operating in 11 countries. We only do one thing. We help service organizations, or the leaders of service organizations, change their organization from a conventional command and control design to a systems design. I was introduced to these ideas by W. Evans Deming, an American, who made the obvious point that humankind invented management. Current management doesn't work very well. We can change it, and we should run our organizations as systems. If you follow that route, you can typically, in a service organization, expect to get a massive ramp in customer satisfaction because it works better, much better for customers. And at the same time, a big drop in your operating costs, sometimes as much as 50%. So you would imagine that everyone would be doing it. Well, what stops people doing it is it's so counterintuitive. It really does fly in the face of all the things we believe about management as we've been taught by the command and control ideas, which actually, interestingly, the heart of which is budget management. And who invented budget management? There's a question for the audience, and the answer is a certain James McKinsey. But there we are. It's the central part of the disease, and I talk a lot about that in the book.
Yeah, indeed. The book you're referring to is Beyond Command and Control, which I think came out last year.
That's right.
And it's a great read. It's really good and expands on the original Command and Control thesis that you put out there. And it was around, forgive me or correct me if I get this wrong, but it was around initially the productivity gap or crisis in the UK that you started to look at command and control structures and strategies. Is that right?
Well, that's right. And in fact, I think the last chapter, in fact, I think they called it the epilogue in that book, was all about the productivity challenge. And I discuss what the UK government has been doing to try to improve productivity and talk about what needs to happen to improve productivity. But there's no doubt about it. If every service organisation in the land followed the methods that I talk about, we would have a dramatic rise in productivity.
Okay, so let's get into some of the detail then.
Yeah.
The kind of the widespread adoption of digital, I think you kind of question that approach. It seems to be back to front. How do you characterize it?
Well, you will know, Jeremy, I about 4 chapters in that book, all about what's happening with digital, agile, Scrum, and all of that malarkey. But, I would start actually by saying if you read The Economist, as I do, and not that I share their philosophy, but I read The Economist, and The Economist is unequivocal that despite the many years of investment and large investments in digitizing lots of different things, we have yet to see any impact on productivity. It's quite a different story if you listen to the big consultancies. But one of the things I think the audience maybe would like to hear from me is that I think there are about 6 common arguments that the big consultancies use, which are neither proven and indeed are false about why you should do digital services. Shall I run through them?
Yes, please. Why not?
Okay. And the first is that if you have digital services, you'll operate at lower costs. Well, that is true if a digital transaction works. But if a digital transaction doesn't work, and I'll explain why a lot of them don't a little later, actually your costs go up. The number of transactions goes up. So that's not necessarily true. They say that customers want digital access to all services. I don't think that's true. I think the most important thing that customers want is a service that works. They don't want the means, they want the result, this service that works. They also argue that customers want the insurance sector, for example, to be just like retail. But you're not like retail. You're not a retailer, and customers don't expect, for example, if I'm dealing with commercial insurance, my firms, I wouldn't expect that to be like buying a book on Amazon. Why would I expect that to be the case? I'm not stupid. They also argue that digital services will increase trust and loyalty, and that's not true. What decreases trust and loyalty are services that don't work. And I'll describe how that occurs with digital services a bit later. If they do work, you don't get much of a rise in trust and loyalty. It's a bit like money and work, Their fifth argument is that this will help you deal with the risks of new entrants. I don't think that's true. In fact, I don't think the new entrants are actually much of a risk. And we perhaps should talk about what I've learned from startups in the last couple of years later. And finally, their sixth argument is that others are doing really well with this, like Amazon and Spotify. But, you know, you're not Amazon and you're not Spotify. I mean, some ridiculous things I see in my life. You know, we do a lot of work with housing repairs. You know, they have warehouses and they're persuaded by people to go on, you know, a future vision tour or whatever they call it of the Amazon warehouses, because Amazon warehouses work in a different way from a lot of warehouses. And I just think it's such a stupid idea. You know, because the problem you have to solve if you're dealing with housing materials is different to the problem that Amazon's got to solve. And indeed, when you understand the problem you've got to solve with housing materials is, let's make sure we only buy the stuff we're going to use and need. And when you do that, your warehouses empty out and your costs drop by about half. You know, that is not a problem that Amazon has. You won't find a solution to that problem at Amazon. So, you know, we are not all the same, and we really need to understand how our business works. So, but those are the common arguments you'll see from the big consultancies, and they're slightly inaccurate. Let's be polite.
So going forward, what I take from that is, if you need to start with the customer at the heart of what you do, and looking at everything that you do from the customer's point of view, and then engineer your systems and processes to deliver those good customer outcomes.
Well, that's correct. And it's something, I mean, this is an extraordinary thing. You know, when I was being interviewed by Peter Day at the BBC a few years ago, I said to him, you know, the interesting thing about service organizations is that the leaders don't really understand customer demand in customer terms. And he thought that was amazing, but it's true, isn't it? You know, we treat all demand as work to be done. We don't actually study out there, you know, what I would call the type and frequency of customer demand in customer terms, and how predictable are they? And that is the first step in designing an effective service. And we should probably come back to that, because if we're going to talk about digital, that's not what digital does. They, you know, when you buy all these techies and the agile people and the scrum people and all of that, they don't go out and study customer demand and understand it in customer terms. They dream stuff up. They imagine customers. It's the most extraordinary idea. Let's have a persona. We'll call him Jeremy, and you know, we'll say he's a very nice fellow. He's 37 years old. He's got 3 children, and how does he want to interact with us digitally? And then they go from there, and they build these products and services, and they put them out there, and then they have targets to drive customers through these new digital channels. Well, they've just built something without a real understanding of what matters to Jeremy, what matters to any customer, what's the type and frequency of customer demand. So guess what? What you find an awful lot of the time is that if the services aren't working for the customers, and the signal of this is the failure demand that you get, because of course they have to progress chase, they have to fill in forms again, they get irritated, they get angry, they get cross, and you know. But the important thing is you're starting to lose customers because the service doesn't work. In the meantime, the people who've got the targets for digital activation are getting rewards, because the volumes are going through, which is not the same as going through effectively, you know. So that's and so what's the problem behind all of that? And this is I think one of the most important things that the big consultancies don't understand. That digital services, by their very nature, work on rules. And if you design something on the basis of rules, it won't handle variety. So if something is like retail, if something is simple, predictable, and repeatable, then you can use rules and design a service, and customers can pull the value that they want out of that service. If it's not simple, predictable, and repeatable, if it shows high variety and you stick it into a channel that's based on rules, what do you suppose is going to happen? It ain't going to work. And the signal, as I say, is the volume of failure demand. And that, for me, is the big risk with all of this. that, if you take the view, as I think you should as a service organization, the most important asset you've got is your customers, then you shouldn't be doing things that make things worse for your customers.
So you talk a lot in the book about design thinking and a systems kind of thinking approach to service organizations, and to get away from this command and control kind of structure. Are there tangible things that organizations can do to try and kind of break down that kind of legacy thinking in
well, yeah, well, it is a thinking problem. You're right, and it's hard work. Because before I say more about that, let me say a bit more about the second big issue in digital services, because this is part of the thinking that you've got to get into your head. Okay, that what we've seen in practice, and we've seen this all over the world, is that people digitize things that I regard as non-value work. Okay, so here's a very important distinction when you're designing. There's value work, which is related to the customer demand, and the customer defines what that value work is. Okay, because you're going to go into a world where you only do what matters to a customer, and lo and behold, service improves and costs fall. That's that's the basics of it. But there's a lot of things that I would call non-value work. It's everything else that isn't value to the customer. So if you take things like form filling, segmentation, routing, multi-channel access, status tracking. Status tracking is a laugh, isn't it? What's happened to my claim? What's happened to this or what's happened to that? Well, by definition, that's failure demand. Why would you automate these things? Now, a lot of these things are normal in your business. So you might think, well, I should automate entry. I should automate form filling. No. But if you haven't understood the customer demand, you won't understand how that thing that you've automated will deal with the demand. Big problem. So when we start thinking about designing services, we have to start outside in. Demand is the big lever. I said this earlier, knowledge of the type and frequency of demand and its predictability is the fundamental starting place for designing a service that's effective for the customers. And the better you get at that, the lower your costs are going to be. But let me say this, I talked earlier about startups. I mean, the good news is the startups make the same mistakes. I've worked with quite a few startups in the last few years, and there are two big mistakes they make across all of them. The first is this idea that if we build it, they'll come. So we build this digital service thing, and then we do some marketing and we try to attract customers to it, and we're not doing very well. We're getting quite a few customers land, but no one, too few coming through and actually paying us money. And when you help them study what's going on, they learn the lessons we've just been talking about, that because they didn't understand demand in customer terms, what value customers want in their terms, they're not being able to get what they want, and that's what caused them to drop out. So the first big learning about design is, well, how do we use knowledge about the type and frequency of demand to build the right expertise at the point of transaction, so they're better able to get what they want. And they, when you help them do that, they think, oh, that's rock and roll. But in a sense, it's only the start, but it does at least get them out of a hole. The second thing they typically do is they go, well, the world is digital. It's all got to be digital. No face-to-face. You want to talk to us, you use email, you use chatbots, you use stuff, but you don't get people. Well, given what I said about high variety, that's clearly going to be a problem. So they build this thing, they refuse to talk, they get all the failure demand, and you know what they do? They outsource it for someone else to do telephone work. And we were in a startup last year where they'd outsourced this work to a company in Suffolk somewhere, and part of the contract was that because I said, we really need to go and find out what those calls are about. We know they're failure demand by definition. It might give us some clues as to what's going wrong from a customer's point of view, but their contract was written in such a way that they weren't allowed to find out what the calls were about. How stupid is that? two mistakes, designing first without knowledge, and secondly, insisting everything has to be digital. That's not how service works. But shall I say more about design? Or what would you go on?
Yes, I was going to dig a little bit deeper into that sort of design area, and perhaps how you redesign services. Because what we're not saying is digital doesn't have a place. What we're saying is that actually people start, when they're designing systems and processes, from the wrong end of the telescope.
That's correct.
Yeah,
that's correct. I mean, the way I express it in the book is the approach to design is IT first, whereas I teach people IT last. Okay, so instead of IT first is dream stuff up, put it out there, drive customers into it, and then deal with all the trouble. IT last is study, get knowledge of demand is the big lever. Get knowledge of things like how long it takes to actually get a service, how well it's working for a customer. I describe the 3 controls that are necessary for these kinds of designs in the book. And when you first study, you have to use these controls in a sense to find out what's going wrong, because you find it's taking much longer than you imagine because it didn't show on your scorecard, and more difficult than it appears to you on the current measures that you got. So these measures help you look at things differently. And then when you've studied that, then you apply the design principle. Step 2 is design it in a better way. So now we've understood the demand, we'll build the expertise into the right place, we'll put the right controls around it. And now we've got a prototype, if you will, of a service that actually works. And when we've involved the IT people in the study and then redesign, now we can use IT for the things that IT is good at.
Yeah.
So it's IT last. Now, the benefit of IT last is you spend far less and you use all of it, because everything you built is built on the basis of knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is not something you'll get from IT vendors, because IT first makes a lot of money. IT last doesn't make them so much money. And I know this because I've been approached by these vendors saying, look, what you do is really interesting. We want to use it. And when I get them through understanding what it is and how it looks and what IT last looks like, you can see their eyes go, oh, well, that doesn't compute, John, because that means lowering our revenues. And I say, yes, but you're going to be much more effective. What a great differentiator in the marketplace. You can do IT that works and it's cheaper. Funny thing, they're not so interested.
So I wanted to talk to you about a couple of chapters in the book, because these are really interesting. So one is the nature of change, and kind of all organizations have been through a massive amount of change over the last year. They've had to change in order to enable their workforce to work from home, to carry on providing the services that they have been. And I think to a large part, I mean, the insurance, especially London market, was successful in that transition.
Yeah.
And now we're in a period where we're looking forward, this period of transition where we're not sure what our operating or business models are going to look like into 2022, 23 and into the future, but they're not going to be the same as they were in 2019. And so there is an opportunity here for organizations to rethink and redesign systems, structures and things like that.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to kind of explore that. Had you given that any thought about, or had you seen or talked to other organizations, perhaps outside of insurance, and how they are grappling with those very difficult challenges at the moment?
Well, we are working in a variety of financial services companies with people who now work from home. And I think this is one of the major changes that's occurred. My view is it isn't going to go away, because you can be far more productive, actually, if you work in this way. It follows, though, given what I was saying earlier, that the same principles apply. You've got to pay attention. One of the 3 controls that I mentioned earlier that I talk about in the book are knowledge of demand and its predictability, achievement of purpose in customer terms, and focusing on only doing the value work. Because the better we get at that, the cheaper the service is going to be in terms of delivery. And so what we've been doing is helping people develop those controls in a working from home environment rather than as you would normally have it, in a building somewhere. And it's very interesting. One of the most important things that you need to, as a leader of a group working from home, is an understanding of demand teaches you to focus on what are the things that my people are able to do and how do I develop them because I've got this knowledge of demand. Clearly, there are some things that it doesn't make sense to train everybody to do, but when they get those things, they're going to pull help. So how frequently are they doing that? When they pull, does it come? Because we operate this design where you don't pass things on. You do them for people, or you get help doing them for people. That's how you learn, kind of thing. So we've been developing these controls to work in a distributed home working environment. Now, up against that kind of thinking, you might have seen this. There's a new kid on the block called employee surveillance. This is the techies again. Bloody techies! This is what they do. They take tech functionality. Oh, look! We can see your emails. We can see how long your machine is turned on. We can see who you're talking to, how long you're talking for, who you're ringing, whether you're in the meeting. So we can even turn your camera on and watch you at work. Oh, wow! Well, let's turn these into the tools for managing performance. And I'm going, no. I mean, could you imagine? Imagine being, 30 years ago, management invented call centers and they earned the sobriquet sweatshops. Why? Because of surveillance. Right? In those days, it was simple surveillance. It was just how many calls you do, how long you take. Now, this kind of tech surveillance, this reaches down to your inside leg measurement. It's all over you. How would you like to be that person? Everything you do is being watched by somebody else. And it's all being aggregated into some kind of scorecard on you. No, I want you focused on delivering to the customer. So, you've got to avoid this tech surveillance rubbish and build the right controls so that you can work with your people on solving more problems for customers. And you can do that in a working from home environment, much as you can do it working in a building. So that's certainly here to stay.
Right. So final thoughts then, John, just before we wrap up, have you got any, what's your vision for the future? If you're looking in perhaps 3 to 5 years time, what's a winning organization look like? What's your firm bet?
Well, my firm bet is that I only work in service organizations, and I've described a lot of things that I see going wrong with digitization of service organizations. I know from working in so many service organizations do experience very high variety demand, and therefore I'm absolutely sure I place my bottom dollar on the bet that effective service with high variety will always require a human interface, always. And if you haven't got it, your costs are going to be high and your service is going to be lousy.
Right, that was a really great interview, and it's refreshing to see the full thing again. Obviously, we've seen it a couple of times now. I think we can both agree that a lot of the points that were raised there, we'd agree with. However, there are some things we might challenge, especially in the context of the London market. What's your take, Ben?
Yeah, so first, on the things I'd agree with, I'm absolutely of the view with John about the customer focus and making the thing work. I think that is what he describes there is a sort of summarization, if you like, of strategy, market strategy, and why you have to really think about what your offer is and your proposition to the market. And I think that part of this is to say that just having that as a conversation about digital does not really solve that problem. It doesn't address intellectually all the things you have to when you do a proper strategy. So I think in a way, Professor Seddon is a strategist, and that's my take on what he's saying. And if he's saying that, which I think he is, then that's a really good thing. Is really, let's think about strategy and stop just focusing on one aspect of it. The things I find then not difficult, but I would challenge a little bit, is to say we are, though, in a world where technology is in play. So saying digital last is fine, but actually digital is already, we've got smartphones, we've got apps, we're all interacting more and more and more as human beings with different types of technology. Some of it is absolutely appalling and time wasting and frustrating, as he describes. And some of it is helpful. And I think Bart Patrick very early on in one of your webinars said, when it works, it's magical. And I get that. He's right. It's an enabling and empowering thing, because it takes a lot of hassle out of things. And there's lots of areas in our lives where you could say that's it. The breakdown in the productivity argument is when digital doesn't work. It's a mess, and it is. I mean, we can all name numerous examples of once the thing doesn't get delivered, it clearly ups the cost massively of the thing, and so there's some way to go, I think, on all of this. But technology, in a way, is also about experimentation and trying things out, and it's cheap. Some of it. I mean, apps are cheap. App developers put out all sorts of really interesting things. They do them in their bedrooms, and you and I use some of those in our businesses, which adds value to our business. Like we both buy into a transcription service, which has helped us with putting out content much more quickly than we'd used to be able to, and much more cheaply than hiring people to do the transcriptions and the analysis. I've just bought into a proofing app, which sounds dull and boring, but actually we do a lot of proofing in our business, and it speeds it up and it makes it more accurate. So that creates value in the business, and they've just come from someone's ideas in a bedroom, probably a coder. So then my final point, really, I think, is around the power of technology in terms of communications. And I've always said this and believed that really where technology really works is not around particularly the processes or those sort of things, because it can be really clunky, as we know. It starts to work really well when you can communicate. And that's been the experience of COVID. Everybody's talked about technology, but what they've really talked about is communications technology. As far as I can tell, there's been no real process improvement over this period. I can't see the process improvements. What I can see is that we've been able to communicate in different places at different times. We haven't had to commute. We haven't had to fly to places. We haven't had to always meet. So in some areas, that's been efficient, and it's increased productivity. In others, we know it's perhaps reduced creativity and ideas and so on. So when you add it all up, I think there is no simple, I don't think it's a simple argument about just it's either or, in a way. And I'm not sure that Professor Seddon's saying that, but I do think it comes across a bit like that at points, which is like these consultants all sell this sort of stuff in. And they do. I agree with that. They go for a process every single time. Lloyd's blueprint, by its very name and its very nature, my issue with it is it's called a blueprint, and it therefore means that all you talk about is the processes and the technology. And there has not been, in recent times, I don't think, looking at it, any consideration or discussion of the customer. That has gone entirely by the wayside in the blueprint discussion. It's disappeared. Not even there. It's all about, well, we couldn't get this process to work, and PPL's fallen over, and it's about the argument with the we've sat there and we've done it. Whereas the customer's completely been eradicated from that, because you didn't start with that discussion in the first place. So that's where they probably should have started, because the consequences of not satisfying the customer needs going forward are much greater than a system falling over. They're much greater than the 300 million or whatever Lloyd's has spent on the systems so far, which perhaps is wasted. So yeah, I go along with a lot of what he's saying. I do. I get it. And I think it's a very compelling argument. I think that, just to pick up on one point about the Amazon argument, I mean, we've talked in numerous occasions. We've had so many people on here. So it's the slowness of this market, which we know is partly down to the culture, but it's also is down to the system. So you can learn from Amazon on that. I mean, it's not just learning, as we've said, from the technology, but it's learning from the mindset of a business like Amazon.
Yeah, and I think that is the key thing. I think that it's not about the technology; it's about the approach and the way people think about things, and having that real customer, that real desire to work out what customer needs are and then meet them efficiently and in a way that customers want to be dealt with. And I think that is, and as you said, that part of the conversation is often missing in the London market. It just jumps directly to how do we get this process to work faster, or how do we take this manual process and electronify it, or whatever. And it's that I'm more interested in. How do we enable that kind of mindset shift? How do we get more people to question the fundamentals of what we do in the London market and those processes, to say, are they relevant anymore? Should we be doing them at all? That type of conversation.
Well, it's the spirit of the compare the meerkat, isn't it? That's the thing, and that's missing. If you listen to the language of all consultants, including John, I think to some extent, they talk about, we've got to get this right and do this, and that's what you do within strategy. But strategy should also include the creative aspects of what you do and the packaging and the ideas. Lots of YouTubers I know and see are making money because they package things up really attractively. They talk well, they present well. Look at TED Talks. Look at all those things. They're abstract. They don't have TED Talks didn't start with a let's get it right, done for the customer. They started with a fantastic idea that you could inspire people to listen to these interesting people talking about stuff on stages all around the world, and they branded it really well. So it's not as simple as just saying that there are areas, of course, and insurance is one of those, but insurance could be inspiring. Insurance could be all sorts of things if it let those shackles off a bit. So I would want that. I would widen the discussion to say, what's the vision? What's that mindset, as you say, that is still grounded in what has to be done and regulation and all that crap, but actually does say there are things we could really do. And there, I think you say, and technology can help us with that. Yeah,
definitely. So I think the themes that John has raised there, I think we'll be carrying on with those into the autumn, especially at London Market Claims. I know these are big themes we'll be covering over the course of that conference. So we will pick that up in the autumn when we are back. And with that, let's move on. So I've just got a few. It was bits of news, but I thought I'd leave them to the end because they're a bit frivolous. So Tokyo Olympics. I'll be watching a bit of this. I was actually watching it until 2:00 in the morning last night. I shouldn't have been, but I got captivated by the skateboarding, and I didn't see it in the end because it was on too early in the morning. But we got a bronze, which was fantastic. The 13-year-old, I think, Sky Brown. But the track and field started this week, and I remember track and field as being an arcade game in our local list.
Yeah, I bet that was a good game. Not.
It was you basically had to tap the thing so fast to make the guy run, and they're all guys, by the way. There are no women in the track and field.
Really?
1983, this game came out. It was massive. I don't know. Do you remember this, Ben, or not?
I think that's probably, sad to say, that's probably after my time. I mean, I was playing things like Galaxian and Space Invaders was my first games, which was probably even before that. But track and field doesn't look like it moved on much, did it? There was obviously a bit of a becalming of the technology for a few years.
Yeah, indeed.
But it's all right. Yeah, it's ethnically diverse though, that one.
It is. They have four different athletes, all men, different colours, but all wearing moustaches. Interesting.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's the Daley Thompson.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, the Daley Thompson effect. Maybe that's what they all. Maybe that's to. Yeah, but I've enjoyed the mixed relays in both the swimming and the athletics in the Olympics. I think that's a fantastic innovation.
Yeah, I watched the triathlon relay.
Oh, that was brilliant.
Relay. It was brilliant.
Yeah.
And I really liked it that it was smaller chunks of the three.
Yeah.
Because you do get a little bit bored of just watching cyclists go round and round a car park or whatever they do.
Well, and I think things like swimming can be dull as well, particularly some of the relays, because who's won about 10 minutes before it finishes. And those, rather like the Paralympics, you can't quite see how it's going to work out, and you don't know really, because each team has had to take a gamble on whether they put all men first or just, or man, woman, man. That's a great thing. And in the swimming in particular, the combinations with 8 lanes were quite different. So I find that really good. I think it's great. And it does sort of play to equality in a way as well, because it just says, look, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's just, to what we were saying earlier on, it's just a sport. We'll enjoy it regardless, once we see the competition happening.
Yeah.
You don't have to do it always in the same way.
Good. Right. That was me. That's what I'm doing this weekend. And then we're both off next week. So there's no show next week, but we'll be back the following week.
Yeah.
For the end of summer.
Holiday.
Where are you going, Ben? Anywhere good?
I'm not. No. Well, it is. I don't want to be, dissing it, but it's Winchelsea down on the East Sussex coast, which is very nice. I'm on the beach there, so if the weather's good, it'll be great. I'd quite like to be abroad though now.
Yeah, I would too. I'm very close to you actually, so I'm going to be just outside Canterbury. Well, Winchelsea's our beach, our local.
Oh, of course.
Local beach.
Right.
Yeah.
I was with a very senior executive who should remain nameless yesterday having lunch. And he was telling me that he lives next door. One of his houses is next door to George Clooney's house in Lake Como in Italy. Now, it might become clear who that is at some point. I don't think that's giving too much away, but I was rather envious of that.
Yeah, definitely. Right. More of this chat in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Yeah. Good. Have a nice holiday. Yeah. Enjoy, everybody. See you in a couple of weeks.
Bye.
Burgess and Bolton's Weekly Wrap Up.